Well, philosophers, in a certain sense, right, engage in the activity of grasping their own time and thought, which means roughly that we try to understand the concepts in virtue of which we conceive of ourselves as human beings. And the corona crisis, among many other things, right, also affects the core of the human self-understanding. Issues of public health and universal governance, etc., are deeply associated with philosophical reflection. This is why, in times of crisis, philosophers typically are able to tell us, in which particular way we are thinking about ourselves. And I've been working in a recent research project, and I just published a big book, among other things, funded by the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, about the issue of illusion and the role of fictions in human life. And what we're witnessing right now on so many levels is precisely a manifestation of the fact that humans lead their lives in light of a conception of who and what they are. And this conception is as much in crisis as our bodies. The virus does not only affect our bodies, but also our imagination of the nature of the virus and of the nature of a human being and their role in societies. This can be demonstrated with a very simple philosophical operation. We can draw a conceptual, and in that sense, philosophical distinction between the presence of a virus, right? There's a virus, it's spreading in a certain way, it has certain biological properties that can be determined by gene sequencing and so forth, right? There's a nucleus and proteins and all of that, right? So that's just a real presence. On the other hand, there is political decision-making and our psychological attitude towards the presence of such a virus. They must not be conflated, right? There's a difference between a virus and our socioeconomic reaction to the virus. But many people are precisely confused about that very distinction, which is why, for instance, also science and public science communication is in crisis in different ways in different nation states, right? The German, Drosten versus Bild-Zeitung scandal, right, is just one of many scandals. We also have, Dr. Fauci versus Donald Trump, the role of the New York Times, and you can tell a story of this kind for every single nation state. And philosophers in this particular scenario, of course, seize the opportunity to draw distinctions that help us see our situation in a much clearer way. So in times of very deep crisis like this one, philosophy is well equipped to work out better societal models for the future. I think that if we describe an ideal situation, so how reality, the world, ought to change, then I would say that this is an occasion for what I call moral progress in dark times. I literally started writing a book with that title, but I came up with the title before it hit us, right? So, it was in a certain sense, a prophetic book, ironically speaking. But in any event, moral progress in dark times means that, we can now do the right thing, and we did it even at incredibly high economic costs, right? We saved lots of lives by virtually spending everything. The entire German economy was basically invested in order to save lives. And similar things are happening around the globe in different ways. So that's a kind of moral progress. We realize that there's a general, universal human tie. There's something that all humans share with all other humans, namely vulnerability. And so this is a deep moral insight that structures our behavior. And we need much more of that, because the next crisis that is hitting us is the combination of the deep crisis of liberal democracy and the climate crisis. Thinking and acting in borders is always a moral mistake. So borders have a certain function. They can function as administrative structures and autonomous systems of governance. There's I'm not saying we shouldn't have any nation state with borders, right? Borders might serve a certain function. However, it was a terrible mistake, including within the European Union, to close our borders. So what good would it do, even on just an obvious medical, epidemiological level of analysis, to shut down borders, right? It's obvious that it's much better to break the chains of infection if the individuals can move in bigger spaces, because this, trivially reduces the probability of running into someone. And if you just combined the lockdown from 12 weeks ago, say, in Europe, with open borders, then no one would go anywhere anyhow. Why would I take a plane to Spain if everyone is in lockdown? Why would the French come to Germany if the restaurants are closed? So there was no reason whatsoever, I think, to close the borders. I remember when the news were coming in that there is a new virus in China in January. I saw people on the street in Frankfurt and Paris and Hamburg looking like eyeballing Asians, or what they thought were Asians. So this is also a form of racism. And in the United States, even the New York Times printed a fake news story according to which you could detect the genetic origin of the virus and show that New York Times was hit by European forms of the virus, right? There are no European or Chinese forms of the virus. It's just a virus. It doesn't have a passport, right? So this way of thinking about the virus is terrible. And similarly, within science itself, what we need for like any big scientific problem, such as viral pandemics, is a cooperation of all disciplines. You need virologists and sociologists. You need political scientists and politicians. You need businessmen and philosophers, right, in order to solve the crisis.